Hola, estamos aquí en Fundación Telefónica en las charlas que pertenecen al ciclo llamado Repensando el mañana con Jia Tolentino, autora de Falso espejo, reflexiones sobre el autoengaño. Repensando el mañana pertenece a una serie de charlas, como decía, con diferentes expertos en ciencia, tecnología, cultura y comunicación y pretende dibujar una panorámica sobre cómo va a ser el mundo post-COVID y los retos y oportunidades a los que nos enfrentamos. Y Jia Tolentino es una autora que nos tiene que contar bastantes cosas sobre esto. Yo creo que nos va a aportar una luz muy buena sobre diferentes aspectos de esto que acabo de decir. Tolentino nació en Canadá en 1988, se crió en Texas en una familia evangélica. Todo esto viene al caso porque es algo de lo que habla en Falso espejo. Fue a la Universidad de Virginia, algo de lo que también habla, y ahora comentaremos con ella. Fue editora de un blog mítico, una revista online mítica llamada Jezebel, donde toda una generación aprendió sobre feminismo y sobre cómo enfocar ciertos aspectos problemáticos del feminismo y con respecto a las mujeres. Y de ahí pasó a trabajar en la también mítica y legendaria New Yorker, donde escribe sobre temas de actualidad pertenecientes a su generación y que en ensayos que si los lees con atención rompen la cuarta pared, porque ella hace algo que le es muy propio y muy particular y a mí me parece genial, que es hablar de ella misma en un momento dado, relacionar el tema del que está tratando con una erudición bestial y llevárselo un poco a su propia experiencia personal, lo que le abre una puerta más sobre el cual explorarlo. Y con todo este rollo, ahora ya cambiamos al inglés y vamos a hablar con Jia Tolentino. Hi, Jia. I'm sorry. Maybe no. Long an introduction for you. I hope you understand.
Thank you so much for talking to me and for that introduction, which I wish I could understand.
You don't speak a word of Spanish, even though you lived in Texas for.
I can kind of understand it. I mean, my parents are Filipino, and a lot of Tagalog, their language is, so I can understand nouns. I can but I feel so ashamed doing interviews with journalists in other countries because you guys are all doing these interviews in your second and third languages. And I'm a provincial American. I can only.
I think you do enough. I think you know the language of reality, which is not a bad thing to know. So I think you're fine. I'd rather you keep writing on what you know, the language you know. So I was just telling the people who are watching us that you wrote this wonderful book. In its Spanish edition, it's called Trick Mirror. I don't know.
I love that cover. It's my favorite cover.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I really love it. So it's called Trick Mirror. Reflections of self-delusion, which I think is a great title, but begs the question, are you very much self-deluded?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I think one thing that I've always found hard to communicate, because I think I write fairly forcefully and I present myself fairly forcefully, but I always think I'm probably wrong, and it's like writing, and I write about that in the introduction. I think about writing as something that I need to do in order to make sense of things, in order to get rid of the bullshit in my own reasoning and to sort of ferret out like inconsistencies. But then I always worry, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe writing is making me more self-deluded about these things. But I mean, I guess I try to be honest with myself. I try to be clear with myself about what's going on, but it just seems like a very high likelihood for any of us that we're probably wrong about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, all the time, probably. Yeah. It doesn't change the older you get, I think.
Either. Yeah, and not about these big things. Like, let's take everything going on in the States right now. I mean, we're talking at the beginning of June, America is erupting in riots over, and it's like, there's no delusion there, like we know exactly what's going on. We know the history of racism in the United States and, what's happening with police violence. But I mean, but even still, there are things about there are like littler questions about what is our role and what is our place and what is our importance and what should we say and how should we say it and to whom, that seem kind of murky always.
But do we know all the facts actually? Because I was going to ask you about this past few days in the States. And I think a lot of people, it's not what I think. We all know that a lot of people are very, very deluded about race or ethnicity.
Yeah.
In the States, also in Spain, of course, and also in many Western countries. So I don't know that we know a lot of that. I think we do. We want to believe, we're not racist, but we are.
Right. I mean, well, this is, I think, this is a moment, it's an interesting moment in America where I think, I mean, and this is something that people have been writing about for decades, but has not sunk in for a lot of people, surely for me too, that I think a lot of people in America especially think of racism as like actively disliking people who don't look like you and thinking bad things about them. And, they think about it as an emotional affect. They think about it as like, well, I believe in treating people equally, so I couldn't possibly racist. And if you call me racist, I'll be really offended because that's the worst thing anyone could be. When in fact, it's like racism is not a feeling we have about people. It's just the web of structures in which all of America has been built. And I think that we're hitting some sort of inflection point right now where I think more people are realizing that just by existing within the structures that comprise America, they are enacting racism, right? That every single last thing about the housing market, about education, about bank loans, about policing, about, it's all inflected with this great original sin that is bubbling up in such, like hideous and terrifying fashion. And it's something that I've been thinking about it a lot this week as it relates to me and my own attitudes and my own complicity and all of that.
We can expect, I'm assuming, an essay about that.
Well, I'm not going to write about myself right now, but I'm working on something about, I'm writing about bail funds right now because it's interesting. I think it's a moment where a lot of people are rethinking, because America's prison system is ridiculous. We incarcerate so many people, and it's so overwhelmingly, Black and Latino people. And I think this might be a real moment where a lot of people might be considering for the first time that the whole criminal justice system should be dismantled. And that is at least, I don't want to say it makes me feel hopeful, but it's been nice to focus on that, I guess.
I watched just yesterday or the day before Ava DuVernay's 13th Amendment, the documentary film, and I learned about that a little bit the other day, and I was like very surprised to see how the whole slavery system had, as you know, the original sin of U.S. economy had gone on,
absolutely,
to be a part of the society right now through the prison system.
Yeah. And, I think the desire to be a good person, the desire to presume yourself innocent has really infected America, right? That is a form of self-delusion. The national form of self-delusion in the States is believing that the narratives that America propagates about itself, that they're all completely true, right? That this is like a land of equality where anyone can be what they dream of being. When in fact, the narrative is, it's incomplete, right? It's true for some people. It's never been true for some people. And I think we still see this persistent desire to believe, that we're good as people, that we're good as a nation. And maybe that's the fundamental self-delusion that I'm always trying to teach myself that I can do without, why do we need to believe that we're good? I think that it's actually so repressive. I don't even really understand. I think I'm just trying to disabuse myself of the notion that I need that I need to be good, that these systems need to be good in order to fully engage with them and to like live fully. Yeah, I don't know.
The shades of gray. Now we have to acknowledge that we all have, if we're not totally good or totally bad, but there's a fall of from innocence that the state is going through right now. In that sense. I was thinking when you said like I'm not writing about myself right now, and in the introduction I just said that you have a way, which I think it's brilliant, in the way you structure your essays when you write. Apart from the fact that you very seldomly give answers, or you don't aim for that when you're writing, at least that's the impression I get. And apart from the sense of humor that I think you've got, I've laughed out loud with you. Like,
I'm honored.
And I read somewhere that someone said, no, you yourself said something like, older people get depressed reading my articles, and the younger people, my generation, laugh with them. They find that they engage with the sense of humor. So what I was going to say was that I was saying in the presentation that you have a great way of just like pulling out the fourth wall. I mean, at some point during your essay, you will take the subject matter that you're talking about, and then relate it to something that happened to you, or in your terms. But that comes with a lot of scholarly work, so to say. The amount of references and bibliography and the amount of books I've written down that I haven't read, that I've read a lot of what you said, but not all. And of course, it's like they all seem super interesting. Do you think of yourself as a scholar of the present, maybe?
No, I not at all. Not at all. Truly not at all. Like, there are so many people who are far more grounded in actual sort of rigorous critical thought than me. I think I write the way that I do, which is, I try to research as exhaustively as I can. And I usually end up bringing myself into it, maybe because it's like, I don't know, maybe it's a crutch, but it's also, I think the things that I'm interested in tend to be related to things that tend to be sharpened by personal experience, right? My understanding of literary heroines in books, it comes from me spending so much of my life reading. My understanding of the sort of optimization industry of like beauty and fitness and whatever, it comes from the ways that became apparent to me even as a young girl. I think, and I think that, to me, I mean, the reason that I try to read as widely as I can before I write about anything, and also tend to involve my own perspective, it's like, your own firsthand authority and instinct on something, that to me is important, and that, for better or worse, is a primary way that I access criticism. It's through instinct, and you developed instinct through personal experience, I think. But it also seems clear to me that 100 other people will have spent much longer thinking about this than I will. And so,
maybe about a particular part of your essay, but not on your essays are very comprehensive. They cover a lot of aspects of the same theme, but I don't think a lot of people do that. That's differentiates you.
Yeah. Well, and I think also that's one of the reasons that I wanted to write these essays in a book rather than trying to publish shorter versions of these essays online. It's that in a book, you can really access this depth of research that is tiresome to read on your cell phone. Like a book, you can really get into it. And I think with some subjects, let's say, so there's one essay where I write about religion. You were saying in my introduction that I grew up in this very religious community, and it was this essay in a lot of ways was about ecstasy, right, as this connection between vice and virtue, like ecstasy being these things that connected drugs and religion, and the language being the same for so many centuries. People would use them to describe drug experiences and to describe encounters with the divine. And it was like, one of the things I wanted to be clear about is that, my own experience with this in like 2000, one or whatever. It's not unique. It's something that writers have been writing about in mystic religious traditions since, the 10th century. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be able to spread out and to use those old mystical writings and to use old poems and to kind of acknowledge the fact that I'm not writing about anything new, and that, for whatever reason, we as humans have this cognitive connection between, ecstasy hooks us into these two things that we think of as opposites today. And I just think it's, and it's like with feminism too, I feel really conscious of having been part of a very internet-driven wave of the last decade, but it's like anything I could ever think or write about feminism has been laid out for me probably much clearer by feminists of other generations going back a long time. And I think I was always so conscious of that, just writing about feminism, that it seems kind of like the only way to do it is to remember how many people have already written this better than you, and to try to maybe build a little bit on that if you can.
Of course, and also offer your own point of view. I mean, a lot of people might have been writing about the same things for a long time, but there's only one person that has had your experience, and that's where I go back to the fourth wall thing, that your experience is what permeates the whole narration of whatever you're chosen to explain, so that makes it different a little bit. Talking about feminism, I thought it was very interesting when you talk about the cult of a difficult woman. Do you think in feminism? Okay, so sorry. Going back to the theme, the general theme of these conversations, which is, I don't know if you understood that, but it's rethinking tomorrow. The whole, these conversations are called rethinking tomorrow. And so I was thinking that an interesting question to pose you would be the fact that I think, or it's widely acknowledged, that the two revolutions that we are confronting right now are the sustainability. We need to find a way to make our existence sustainable in this planet, and then feminism.
Yeah.
In its wider meaning, not the philosophical movement that makes us women think about women, but in terms of the total equality of the sexes, genders, whatever. So I was thinking that when you wrote that essay, the cult of a difficult woman, we've created, you talk about this when I think it's really interesting, how we are attacking these women, these liberal women, not liberal, libertarian women, libertarian women or extreme right women, and they're the monsters of our own creation. They're the monsters created by feminism in a way. Don't you agree with that? So what are we going to do with that? How are we going to turn that around?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think it's, to me, the fight against, to me, the biggest obstacle in feminism as an element of mainstream culture, which in one way I'm incredibly grateful for. I again feel really conscious of the fact that it really wasn't possible in the same way until the time when I entered media for a woman in her 20s to just be writing constantly about feminism and have it be kind of mainstream. And I'm conscious of that, how much feminism being mainstream has, it's been the foundation of my whole career in a lot of ways. At the same time, I think the clear error has been in making feminism marketable. We have this idea, we've developed this very capitalist idea that feminism means the right of individual women to be successful and beautiful and visible and do whatever they want, because that's feminism. And that's a very seductive idea, because we're all selfish and we all want to do whatever we want, right? But it's this prioritizing of individual success and freedom over collective well-being and collective freedom. And I think that we, like women, already know, anyone that really believes in equality understands that it has to be, feminism can't be top down. It has to be bottom up. It has to be about labor and policy and, you know, safety nets and the sustainability of our systems just generally. But, you know, in terms of what attracts visibility and money, it's the other version.
Yeah.
And so what we do about, you know, like women who insist that feminism is this sort of monstrous version where a woman gets rich and gets impunity to do whatever they want, and you can't criticize her because that's not feminist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do we do about it? It's like, we all know that's bullshit. I guess the real answer is just, we got to focus on the other end. You know, we have to reignite and revitalize the, you know, the radical potential of the 60s and 70s about care work. I mean, this is one of the things I've been thinking about with coronavirus. You sort of, like, let's say even just something like childcare, it's becoming increasingly visible that this work is very devalued, that we need, like, that it's worth, you know, all these parents are like, I would pay someone $1 million to take my child away from me right now, you know? And like this, the work of just, even just nursing and caring for the elderly, these things that fall on women to do and that are, you know, often thought of as things that women should do for free. It's like, you know, I hope that we emerge from this with some sort of reckoning that, you know, we have to support the people doing frontline support jobs, you know, who are working in grocery stores. Like the majority of low wage workers in the States are women. And it just seems like we're at a moment where, you know, feminism has to mean making sure that people who do this kind of work can flourish and be free, you know?
Yeah. And that's exactly what we are confronting here as well.
Yeah.
It seems sensible the way you're
like it seems sensible. And then, but all the time I'm like, do I even understand anything? Because it's like our Democratic presidential candidate, like, doesn't even support universal, or doesn't even support Medicare for all, our sort of best universal healthcare policy. And it's like, we're in the middle of a pandemic and the left candidate doesn't support Medicare for all. I'm like, maybe I don't understand the world, you know, like, I must not understand anything. You know,
you're in the right side. Let me say that.
Yeah, but our left party is so conservative. It's just unbelievable. Yeah.
And I don't think you think the numbers are going to be known for real in the States ever, because I don't know how they're going to count people that don't go to a hospital. First, they don't have the money. Second, because they can be deported if so. Third, you know. So a lot of people are going to die that are not going to be accounted for.
I think that, yeah, I mean, newspapers are trying to keep track of just the actual death rate. And I think we'll be able to put together, you know, the numbers of, okay, if the death rate itself is this much higher than the previous year. But yeah, I mean, the way that the States has handled this entire pandemic, I mean, it's been one of the things that has been the most heartbreaking of the last week. It's like, our nurses are out here, you know, re-wearing the same surgical mask for a week. And our police officers are in full military riot gear. You know, it's like, we can outfit the police to violently crack down on protesters, but we can't outfit our doctors and nurses to actually keep the population safe. I mean, it's like, it couldn't be any more sort of metaphorically clear.
Yeah. Like metaphorically clear, literally wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's it's terrible. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm being naive here, but there can be some sort of hope, perhaps.
I think so. I mean, I think that this is what I've been trying to,
because from this, the sorry for interrupting you, But from a while ago, what you read, I lived in the States for a while, and what I read back then, like 20 years ago, to what I read right now, that the fact that I've seen Clinton apologize from some sort of policies that he implemented when he was president. It's like the whole speech, the whole discourse is changing a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
The outbursts of violence, which are, from my point of view, absolutely justified, because I mean, they're not desirable, but they're justified in a way. Does that lead you to think that there might be some sort of hope?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the combination of coronavirus and the protests about George Floyd's murder and all the other murders, this is a radicalizing moment for a lot of people. I think a lot of liberal people in the United States are becoming more radical, are kind of understanding that there's no time for compromise. There's no possibility of compromising on issues of human life. That there's never any point siding with the police over the people who are protesting police violence. I think that we're at such an end of the sort of, like you said, I mean, like it really feels like it's now or never for everything, right? Mm-hmm. It's now or never for our environment. It's now or never for just every last little thing. And I do think that, and one thing that is giving me hope is that I think it's becoming clearer to people here that, we have nothing but what we can do for each other. Like we can't count, clearly in America, like we can't count on our country to protect us. We can't count on our elected officials to really change things. And that is actually the huge realization of this moment, I think, that people are understanding, that saying, everyone register to vote. It's like, it doesn't matter, like we can all vote once a year, in our local elections. It doesn't matter if the police force is still armed to the teeth with these, with these weapons, and that real sort of recapitulation of this radical potential of just whatever we can do with each other without institutional help right now. I've been thinking about that, and I don't know if I'm feeling hopeful about it, but it does feel new. Mm-hmm. And it is the thing that I try to think about, is like, how can hopefully this window of discourse and thought and action will swing wider open now than it has at any point,
because you even can see it like in the smaller stuff, like the frivolous stuff, let's call it, like when famous people and celebrities got a backlash, from their singing. What was it? Imagine.
Right? Yeah. It's like people are like, no, we need more. Like we need, like, open that checkbook, like
wow, already.
Yeah, and I think there's like this real like patience and impatience and anger, justified anger, for it's like, and we all need to figure out how to do as much as we can today, every day, and that's the only way we're going to survive. And I think that's true of like all the problems we really face, like climate. Like we're going to have to learn to mobilize, or else, there's like really no future for human life. That's and yeah, I do think that this is a catalyzing moment.
Good. Yeah. Gives me hope. You're hopeful in a bit, in a way.
Well, you see all these protests all over the States, and it's like, it's a lot of young people who are like, I'm healthy, I'm going to risk the exposure, and I'm going to do this, and that makes me feel hopeful too.
Love it. Yeah. So let's talk about something more not frivolous, but a bit lighter, let's say.
Sure. Yeah.
So fiction. I've been wondering a lot because I don't know, a lot of people around me have been telling me that they couldn't concentrate at the beginning of the confinement. You're still there. I mean, you're still confined, right?
Yeah. Are you?
A bit less, this nice place that you're seeing right now, it's because I'm allowed to go out a little bit, and
your lockdown was so strict.
Oh my God. Was it? Yeah, it was terrible.
So bad for like the poor kids.
Yeah, the kids suffered like a lot of it, but they've been champions. I mean, the way the kids have behaved is like, whoa. Like,
that's really amazing.
I don't have kids, but I just like see my friends, and they've been fantastic.
It's also a testament to their parents too. I mean, I can only imagine that trying to keep your kid happy and engaged in 2 rooms is like,
teaching them how to be bored, which is something.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Don't you? I mean, I don't know if your mom told you, your dad told you that, but mine certainly told me from time to time, it's like, go get bored. I mean, something like, I don't care what you do, leave me alone.
Yeah, totally.
So I was thinking that, wondering what fiction has brought you joy. This, to Marie Kondo, the term. But
I've been reading so much because it's one of the only, and actually, a Spanish journalist has been giving me like incredibly wonderful, like for El País has been giving me these incredibly wonderful reading recommendations. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I discovered I had never read Merce Rodoreda. And so I read The Time of the Doves and Death in Spring. And I think, like, I've been reading a lot of fiction about like set in wartime kind of, because it's this peculiar analog, where things are restricted, where there is a much more important thing going on a bit outside your grasp, just times in which people are really thinking more deeply about change and historicity and love and family. And, I don't know, but the real book that I had never read the Wolf Hall trilogy, Hilary Mantel's. And I would never really think that would be, like, I don't read historical fiction, but I spent the whole first month reading those 3 books. And
it was because you were recommended them, or because you chose to be curious?
Like, okay, quarantine, there's some books, like I always want to read, like all the Elena Ferrante books. I was like, I saved them for a week that I was on vacation and I could read like 3 of them at once. It's like when there are books like that, I want to just save them for a moment where I can really, where it's not like in New York where I'm reading for 10 minutes on the train and then 30 minutes before bed. It's like, I want to just read them. And I was like, okay, well, I'm stuck in my room, like that was a good time to read 1,500 pages about Thomas Cromwell or whatever. And like transcendentally good. I mean, like those books were so, and there's a plague in those books. Like there's all this mysterious plague kind of as a subplot. And it was nice to just remember, like, we're just these tiny little drops in this long stream of history. And these 3 months that we're spending in our houses, like it's nothing compared to how long people have been getting sick and dying and trying to build lives for themselves and trying to understand, like I think it's helped me to remember other times in history and how this feels so unique and so unprecedented, but in the grand scheme of things, many parts of it are not. And I think,
like you were saying before, right?
And there have been other revolutionary moments. There have been other, like, I think it's helped me right now to remember my smallness. And I think fiction is always, and to feel connected to like other lives. And it's one thing that I've appreciated about being a journalist more than ever, which is like, I have an excuse to call a stranger up and be like, can you talk to me about whatever you're doing, And I've never been more grateful for that than right now, when it's like, otherwise I'm just talking to my dog all day, you know.
We're talking to plenty of journalists, like people who are asking you stuff. No, I'm not a journalist, but you know, people who are asking you about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I love that because it's also like, well, it's been nice for me this last couple of months to be able to talk to people in Italy and Spain and be like, how are you doing? And hear your sirens coming across the, you know, like ask, just talking from the epicenters of the lockdown.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of amazing to, like, we're also in this weird global moment where almost everyone on earth is thinking about the same thing in a way that, you know, that's never happened in my lifetime or in our lifetimes, right? I mean, every single person on earth has thought about this pandemic and how it's changing their lives. And that's really
amazing how I mean, people are going out and protesting on the streets, even though the pandemic, still, a lot of them wear their masks. So they're of that, but, you know, still, you know, a certain attention span that can be very short in a way, you know, suddenly we've all forgotten about
or it's also just like, this is more important, you know, like it's sort of willingly risking, you know, your own, I think I'm pregnant right now. And so I haven't gone to the protest because I'm like, maybe you shouldn't, but I think this weekend I'm going to, because and I'm just going to try to keep my distance because, you know, it feels like this is a moment. And I don't know, like as a journalist and as a citizen, I kind of want to be there for it. Have you read anything great during pandemic?
You know, that's something I was telling your editor about not that long ago when he told me that I might be doing this. That's something that you do a lot and you do in every interview. Like,
I also want to know.
Yeah, you turn the focus into the other person.
I mean, I am not interested in myself at all anymore. Like, it's like but yeah, have you read anything interesting?
I have actually. I was sent Mary Gaskell's, I can't remember the title in English,
that book. Really short story that she wrote? I haven't read it. Is it good?
The novella. It is good, but I think they're marketing it all wrong. I mean, I'm sure she wrote it, you know, thinking that it was about the Me Too movement, or maybe
I don't think they should market anything as like Me Too fiction. I don't like that marketing.
But it's also, for me, you know, from my point of view, I don't think it's real either, because this is a novella that the Me Too movement made possible.
Yeah.
You know? But it's not about Me Too. It talks about, you know, this kind of guy who is abusive, or, you know, depending from the point of view of whom, you know, you can discuss, you know, it's like, this is the guy, this is what you've done, discuss. But it's not about that. Actually, the two characters are the protagonist, the supposed abuser, the accused, and his best friend, who is a woman.
Yeah.
So this is what I find interesting, you know, the whole interaction between the two friends.
Yeah,
and
totally.
How that happens. And that's not when Harry met Sally relationship, you know, we remember that film when he says, no way a man and a woman, heterosexual man and woman, can be friends. Yeah. You know, these two are, and she stays his friend, you know, amidst the whole, you know, problem that he's having.
I tend to think that all of the sort of Me Too novels, the good ones are all much more interesting than the term Me Too novel. You know, it's just like, even like every individual story that got classified as part of the Me Too movement, like every individual story is always more interesting and more complicated than the sort of aggregated, and like and I guess that's just a function of, you know, maybe just how hashtags work, or how it's easier for us to process things in the most simple form possible. But yeah, it's, I want to read that.
Yeah, it's easiest to, and also it's like everybody's waiting for the first Me Too novel that poses a real problem with the Me Too. You know what I mean? It's like somebody, they want to find this holy thing, you know, that everybody's waiting for, the novel that finally contradicts Me Too in such an intelligent way that Me Too is completely destroyed. It's like, hey, no, we need
right.
to.
It's like, probably, yeah, and it's like you're probably not going to find that because there have been a lot of like. There's this book called My Dark Vanessa that just came out in the States. That is the protagonist is a victim of abuse that hates the Me Too movement, and so, the novel argues against it in many ways, but also ultimately makes the case for it. And it's like, that's what a nuanced novel will do. Like you'll never, like any novel that's like, we don't need this. Like, it's like, well, that's probably not going to be a good novel, it's probably not going to really correspond to how the world works and how our brains work and our hearts work. Because it's interesting because so many of these novels have kind of argued against simplified versions of the movement from the inside, right? Which is what they should do. Yeah.
And this one, they want to make it that, but it doesn't have the girth to start with. I mean, it's so short that it's impossible to make a really nuanced argument against. Oh, Me Too is. Yeah. Is it something? It's something that you would read about, and you would think, yeah, I know this. You just like, tell me something new. Yeah. But what I find interesting, on the other hand, is that the thing that is not being marketed at all, which is the friendship between a man and a woman. I don't know. Yeah. I think, and talking about Me Too and social media and everything, which you belong to a generation who has grown with it, who's digital natives, so to say. Yeah. So. Where do you think this is all going? I would be amazed if I didn't ask you of all people about that. But where do you think all the social? What do you
mean, our use of social media just generally?
Yeah, because I read like in one of your essays you mentioned the fact that there's this kind of also backlash against like Instagrammers who have been like showing their beautiful lives, and then suddenly it's like, no, Instagram destroyed me because I'm a very sad person, whatever. That's something that you say actually in your essay. You still think that, or in a year, everything is so fast with social media, so maybe it's changed?
I think that right now we're entering a phase in which the shortcomings of social media are so brutally apparent to everyone who is reliant on it in some way, but and people are now trying to navigate those shortcomings at the same time that there are so many incentives to continue using all these platforms because they've become incredibly central to political life, cultural life, intimate relationships, right? I think that we're at this like unbearable point where awareness of the problem of social media is very, very high, but the incentives and the necessity to use these platforms is also very high, especially right now in the pandemic, where we often have no other means of communicating or being with each other. Like about these protests, like they're organized online and then you go in person, but they're organized online. And so I think that, to me, basically, as long as the underlying structures of social media remain the same, as long as the underlying idea is that we're surveilled, we're under surveillance by companies, we're under surveillance by ourselves, and that is profitable for the companies and somehow also for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that as long as it's profitable for the companies for us to spend as much time on them as possible, that will incentivize, as long as the incentives are the same, it's going to be kind of bad. It's like we'll always have this situation where people are trying to be human on them, are trying to be soft and real and honest. But at the same time, what the systems incentivize is like kind of is the opposite of that. It incentivizes sort of a use that's based on compulsion and anger and competition and stress. And I think that those things will just you know, as long as these companies are employing psychologists to make sure that we spend as much time on these networks as possible, we're going to, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I have to use like software. I have to use programs on my computer and on my cell phone to stop me from using social media for more than like 90 minutes a day. Because otherwise I can't stop. Otherwise I'm just like,
I'm gonna ask you for those names, for the names of the app.
ridiculous. On my phone, it's a program called Freedom. It's so like Orwellian, like 1984. And on my computer, it's called self-control.
Self-control.
Yeah. So it's like I've been sending emails to the companies being like, hello, my freedom isn't working. Like, can you please reactivate my freedom?
Are you for real? You really have written that?
Yeah. Because it's like, hello, dear freedom, your program isn't working. Like, well, you know, can I get a discount on freedom next month? Like, but yeah, basically, like, I don't know. I mean, probably I have like maybe I have like kind of an oversimplified sort of cultural Marxism thing going on but to me, it's like, unless the underlying structure of social media changes, everything will only escalate. You know, it seems that so much about our world is primed for escalation, shows no sign of de-escalating. And a lot of what is ahead of us is to figure out ways of sort of forcibly blocking and de-escalating these things that are making everything feel so overheated and unsustainable, you know?
Yeah. And also the next generation, the one that goes after you, also may confront all this in a different way, perhaps. I don't know.
They might reach a full limit and go insane and revolt. But you know, like, the internet, I think, is going to be even more central to their professional paths, right?
Yeah, and the social media imposes, maybe not.
Maybe.
It's going to become, it's obvious, like you said. I mean, we've been in the middle of a pandemic, and the only thing that has kept us sane has been the internet. Like,
right.
In whatever form you want to, like from Netflix to sending an email to working online, that's what has kept us sane in a way. No?
Yeah.
But I'm talking specifically about social media, which is, I've got the same love-hate relationship I think you do with that. So I can't help it, but I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think that, like, I mean, I do think that people who are, let's say, 15 right now, like, whereas for me, I was a kid and I was like, the internet is amazing. It's so great. It's full of promise. I can do anything. Nobody can see me. Like, I can do whatever I want. And then, you know, by the time I was 20, I was like, oh no, wait. But these kids, I think that they like whenever I interview high schoolers for work or whatever, like, they already know everything is fucked up. That's what I found really reassuring about, like, you know, the wave of sort of climate protests that were happening all over, you know, and those were mainly teenagers, right? And it made me feel also really hopeful to see a bunch of 13 and 14-year-olds holding up signs that were like, you know, against profit as the incentive for everything. Mm-hmm. Like, they understand how deeply the profit motive is endangering their mental health, their physical health, their future. And that makes me feel excited that, like, these radical ideas are second nature to them because they understand how bad everything is already.
Yeah.
You know, whereas when I was 13, I was like, everything's wonderful, you know, like, I'm stupid.
We're just being a teenager in the tradition of teenagers, you know.
Totally. Well, I wish that these teenagers had the ability to not think about, you know, guns in America and not think about climate change and, you know, think about how.
So I think they're safe. They've got TikTok.
Yeah.
So, there's this like superficial part that I think they've got covered for now.
Yeah, totally. That's absolutely true.
In a way, they are the ones that are going to save us in many aspects,
I hope.
So, yeah, I just want to finish with one last question. I heard you say once that you choose your themes, because most of the times you can't help but writing about things that revolt you, but that attract you in the same amount. It's like you can't help yourself and you need to analyze. So we've been talking a lot about, your book, and we've been talking about nonfiction. Could that be translated into a work of fiction for you? I mean, for you to write or not?
I've tried to write fiction, actually. I went to a graduate school program for fiction writing, mostly because it was the only way I could figure out how to get paid to write. Like, I was in my early 20s and I was like, okay, if I apply to grad school, I'll get time to write and, it'll be paid for, because the program like paid for everyone to go. And I always did try to write fiction. Like when I was a kid, when I was in college, I've always tried to. And I worked on a novel actually for like 5 years. And then in 2014, my book agent that I have now, she signed me for that novel in like 2012. And then in 2016 or so, I was like, I hate this novel. I was like, I didn't say I hated it, but I was like, I think it's bad. I'm just going to shelve it. But it's funny you ask, actually. Lately, I have been thinking about ways. I've started writing fiction a little bit again. Mm-hmm. Maybe because before I couldn't, because I was so deeply in my own voice. But now I'm a little sick of my own voice, and I want to try on someone else's voice. And yeah, I think that absolutely I have found myself trying to write exactly about that, things that attract and repulse me at the same time. Because and it's so much about like stereotypically, like women's culture is like that, right? Like the last essay in my book is about weddings. Mm-hmm. And it's like, weddings are they're so ridiculous. Like the impetus for me writing the essay was that my boyfriend and I have been to like 40 of them in the last 10 years. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Like, it's the princess.
Like, yeah, that's the thing. The way you describe it, like, what?
Exactly. And like changing your name and like all this stuff. I'm just like, I hate it so much. And at the same time, I'm like, I love it. I want to get dressed up and party with my friends. And it's so beautiful, my bride, and it's that tension between, like, weddings are exactly that kind of thing where I like, I find them like such a pointless use of money and so patriarchal no matter what and whatever. And at the same time, I've been to 40 of them because I love them, and there is a way in which fiction allows like a little bit more playfulness with that kind of stuff that I'm kind of trying to see. But I don't think I'm very good at writing fiction still, which makes me want to write it more. So
I disagree completely. I think you have it in you. I mean, precisely because of that last essay that I was just reading today. There's the rant that you go on in the car with Andrew driving, and you go like, "What should we go to the wedding?" It's like, we're gonna go into the name. It's like, I'm imagining you. So that kind of pace, that kind of rhythm, I think that's part of fiction as well. So
I will take this as a vote of faith and keep on writing my little short story that I'm working on right now.
Thank you so very much for this conversation.
Thank you for taking the time.